Sunil Sharma, the director of the Center for the Study of Asia, and I'd like to welcome you very warmly to this event. Thank you for coming out on this cold fall afternoon, evening. But in a very cordial welcome to Professor William Kirby. Thank you so much for coming from across the river and to give such a timely kind of a discussion on such a timely topic. And we are all looking forward to hearing about your book. I will leave the formal introduction to my colleague, Professor Mingye, who will introduce you properly, but thank you.
Thank you very much.
This is dangerous. Hello everyone, my name is Mingye. I'm a professor of international relations and the director of Pardee Center for the Study of Longer Range Future at Boston University. I really appreciate you coming out tonight. The topic, of course, is very attractive, but also know BU has many events tonight. We try to book a bigger room so that you don't have to squeeze together, but it was all booked out. So I'm hoping that smaller room, perhaps more intimate conversation and more interpersonal interaction. So do take the advantage of the closeness you get. Professor Kirby is well known in the China field, and I have long admired his work. But it's so many accomplishments, so I have to read from my notes. He is T.M. Chang Professor of China Studies at Harvard University, and spent Family Professor of Business Administration at Harvard Business School. He's also a University Distinguished Service Professor, Chairman of the Harvard China Fund, and the faculty chair of the Harvard Center in Shanghai. At Harvard, he has served as director of the Fairbanks Center for Chinese Studies, chair of the history department, and dean of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. His current projects include case studies of trend-setting Chinese businesses and a comparative study of higher education in China, Europe, and the United States. His recent books include Can China Lead? And China and Europe on the New Silk Road, and his latest book, Empires of Ideas, Creating Modern Universities from Germany to America to China, that's available today. And Professor Kirby will sign books after the talk. Let me also share a personal note. So I joined BU in 2007 and had my first child in 2008, and that was before pre-tenure leave era. So I was very fortunate to receive a Princeton, Harvard, China, and China the World Postdoc Fellowship, and was a resident at Fairbanks Center for the year 2009 and 2010. Professor Kirby was my big boss, So he was a director of the Fairbanks Center, but he was just an extraordinary institutional and intellectual leader. He made the Fairbanks Center, basically the gathering place of China scholars from this area. Our now late colleague, Professor Joe Phil-Smith, was one of the common scholar there. They organized events, invited speakers, and basically engaged students and younger scholars very frequently. So I was very fortunate to be welcoming into that vibrant community when I was just starting my career as a China scholar and also a new mom of a kid. So thank you, Bill, and I really want to thank our late colleague, Professor Joe Phil-Smith as well. And so I feel like it's such a honor for me to welcome Professor Kirby as the first speaker of our Pardee Center speaker series for the year. This year also marked the center's 25th anniversary. The Pardee Center for the study of longer range future is also the gathering place for interdisciplinary scholars, economists, scientists, environmental scientists, health experts, and political scientists, sociologists, and many, many historians as well. So our inaugural dean, Donald Zhang, was right here. So I was so blessed to be this community as well. So I thank you guys for coming, but I hope you guys can also keep coming to our events. We have a next event planned on December 2nd, Tuesday, 5 to 6:30 at the center. It's to celebrate our 25th anniversary winter open house, and we'll try to bring back our former colleagues to share their experience and their vision. And of course, this event is co-organized with my colleague Kathy Ye and Hiromi Miyagi, with support Sunil and the staff member Maria Elena and Elizabeth Amering. I'm just so blessed with this very collaborative faculties and support system. So with that appreciation and the holiday cheers, I'll turn to the stage to Professor Kirby.
Thank you so much. Well, it's wonderful to see here in this room so many old friends, people who've been part of our collective effort here in the greater Boston area to study China. And it is a moment of particular sadness after the loss of Professor Fewsmith, because he came to BU about the same time I came to Harvard. And he was one of our comrades who, was just he gave enormously, of course, to Boston University first and foremost, but an extra time also for seminars, workshops, advice also to doctoral students through our Fairbanks Center. Went to China with him several times. We had this Fairbanks Center delegation, also with the great Professor Steve Goldstein, that would go to both Taiwan and PRC to do a kind of a second level cross-strait discussion. And the more we went, the worse relations got. I'm not sure we did anything to improve it. But in any event, it was just a wonderful, wonderful colleague, and I will miss him. So I'm so sorry to hear that. Well, I'm here to talk about what is our common world of universities, and universities, particularly in different ages of authoritarianism, one of which may be coming up here. We shall see. But it's, as you've seen, and you're so dutifully getting this book, I'm so happy. It's based. This talk is based on this book, the second edition of which, with some changes, came out just earlier this year. And who does not know, what university do you think this is? But not, there are two people in this room I know who know the answer.
Is that Nanjing University?
It is Nanjing University, but in fact it was built for Jinling University, and the predecessor of Nanjing University, one of the predecessors of Nanjing University, in 1919. And I chose it for the cover because it shows you several things. One, it's a beautiful piece of architecture in wonderful Chinese style. But second, because it shows the connections between China and the rest of the world, both in intellectual and physical architecture. The architect was an American architect who was the grandfather of my now retired colleague in the Harvard Economics Department, Dwight Perkins, New York firm at that time. But it's also simply a beautiful building, which is why I wanted it on the cover. This book has now been translated into Chinese in Taiwan with a totally different cover. They don't want Nanda, they don't want Nanjing University on the cover, they want Harvard Business School. because they actually want to sell some copies. And they've given it a much more practical title and so on and so forth. And early next year, the mainland Chinese simplified character edition will be coming out.
Okay, what's the color?
We're still working on the title. But the one thing I can tell you about the mainland edition, that it will be 比较短一点. It'll be a little shorter because some parts are being cut, particularly the chapter about the University of Hong Kong. This is fascinating to me. But we have a shared history, Boston University, Harvard University, Tsinghua University, Nanjing University. We have a shared history as research universities. You all know that universities are age-old, more than a millennium old. But the modern research university is only a little bit more than 220 years old. It began in 1810 in this city, in Berlin, in the aftermath of Prussia's defeat by France. And by the Treaty of Tilsit, Prussia lost half of its territory, 3/4 of its universities to the French. And the Prussian king, Frederick William III, said this. And nobody else has ever said anything as good since, as far as I can tell. We will replace with intellectual strength what we have lost in physical strength. And he deputed this gentleman, not this gentleman here, but he gave this building, a princely building, to the university, and he deputed this gentleman, Wilhelm von Humboldt, to work with many other people to create an altogether new idea of a university. What should it be? And how would Prussia distinguish itself? First, it would be a research university. The idea of a place to create knowledge, not simply to pass it on. Second, that knowledge would be created by faculty and students working together, the unity of teaching and learning in laboratories or in seminars. Third, the faculty would have Lehrfreiheit, the freedom to teach, and the students would have Lernfreiheit, the freedom to learn. Fourth, the center of the university would be the philosophical faculty, no professional school. You know, German universities have been dominated in the study of law and medicine and theology as their professions. No, the center would be what we would call, at least at Harvard, the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, as the foundation of a real education. And fifth, no matter where they got their money, even if entirely from the government, it would be institutionally independent to make its own decisions, whom to hire, what to teach, and so on. And this model, a great model, has never been perfectly executed anywhere, including at the University of Berlin. But it is the model that would take the world by storm in the 19th century, redefine also American higher education, and it remains the ideals of every leading research university in the world today. It's a revolutionary act because an institution like this didn't exist before. And so it has a huge impact. For example, this is this great library there, right across from the State Opera. A huge impact in the United States. So how many of you have been to Stanford? Okay, what's the motto of Stanford?
It's in German.
It's in German. That's the only point that really matters. It's die Luft der Freiheit weht. The wind of freedom blows, of intellectual freedom. So even this, this businessman setting up a new university on the West Coast, this robber baron university, understands that the future is with academic freedom, and Stanford would stand with it, at least in their motto. Nobody at Stanford can pronounce this today. This is what it is. But to go quickly through this part, the wind of freedom stops blowing shortly in Berlin in 1933. If you go back to here, this is Max Weber at the 100th anniversary of the university in 1910, gives a lecture, and he says, yes, we have academic freedom within the bounds of political and ecclesiastical orthodoxy, yes. Outside of that, not so much. And it is true that if you ask the question, which you can ask of Chinese universities today, can you have liberal education in a politically illiberal polity? The German answer is yes, to a considerable but not perfect degree. But this all ends in 1933. Until 1930, the University of Berlin is without question the leading university, still, despite the First World War, despite the travails of the Weimar Republic, recognizes the leading university in the world, the most prestigious place. And it gets destroyed from within by the Nazis. Here is a burning book, gathering books to be destroyed on that same library Platz, in Opernplatz there in Berlin in 1933. It would be destroyed from within and by National Socialist government, purging the faculty of Jews, of liberals, of others, and of many great scientists who would come to this country. Here's a letter by Hitler and Goering dismissing a professor. You see National Socialists at every university gathering. Becomes an enormous chill. And then, of course, it gets destroyed from without by Allied bombs during the Second World War, to be broadly but not perfectly rebuilt. And you can visit some faculties of what's today called the Humboldt University that have maintained their bullet-ridden facades, just to show you what can happen. An alternative German university grows up in a divided Berlin after the wall, and after the war, divided by the Berlin Wall. The Freie Universität Berlin, a place of enormous academic freedom in this divided city, a place where John Kennedy gave one of the greatest speeches ever given, I would say the greatest speech ever given by an American president on higher education, as to what it means to be a free university. And perhaps our current leaders could read that speech. You can hear it at the JFK Library, and get it online from the JFK Library here in Boston. This is given just months before his murder in 1963. The university would become, from some American perspectives, a little bit too free in the period of anti-Vietnam War protests in the 60s and 1970s. And I myself was a student in Berlin in the 1970s, and this was a very raucous place. I took a seminar on Marx, and in our seminar of 15 people, 15 students, there were 6 different communist parties. We had the would-be Maoists, we had the Soviets, the East German, the Albanians, and a few other weirdo communist parties. And we learned nothing about Marx. Learned not about student politics. But this university, of course, the wall comes down, Berlin is united. But I got into this topic at the 200th anniversary of the University of Berlin, now called the Humboldt University, and I went to this in 2010. And the title of the conference was, Berlin, the original model. But the president of the university welcomed us with these words, quote, "Nobody would take my university as a model for anything today." He was very quickly no longer the president of the Humboldt University, but he was not wrong, because the greatest university in the world for well over a century is no longer the best in the world, not the best in Germany, not even the best in Berlin. Times change. Not everything keeps going up. That probably would be news to John Harvard here. Another statue, but of not quite the intellectual heft of Humboldt's, creating a university that would itself emulate other architectural and intellectual forms, really kind of British collegiate forms originally. It starts to study German models in the 1840s under this gentleman, 1830s and 1840s, Josiah Quincy, who believes that the faculty should have Lehrfreiheit, the freedom to teach. But he doesn't believe that the students should have the freedom to learn. He personally graded the essays of every Harvard student. The place is really small in those days, so, and he was a harsh grader. The students hated him. They burned him in effigy in Harvard Yard, and he expelled the entire sophomore class. So, people looking for academic discipline today only look at President Quincy. But it was this guy in the second half of the 19th century who, following the models of Johns Hopkins and the University of Chicago, brought in a true German model to Harvard, just as other places were doing, founding the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences, sending many Harvard faculty to Germany to study. You could not get a job in leading American universities in the second part of the 19th century without having studied in Germany. And it's, in many ways, like in China today, it's much easier to get a high-ranking job at a major Chinese university by studying in the US or UK or Japan or elsewhere. Studying only in China, very, very difficult. So Germany's still the gold standard. His successor would take this rising Harvard University down several notches by being very parochial. This is a time of internal authoritarianism at Harvard. This is President Lowell, who, unlike the very meritocratic Eliot, believed that Harvard should really be for white people and white boys more than anything else, and above all was a virulent anti-Semite. And he set quotas for Jews. He began preferences for alumni in admissions, alumni sons in admissions, knowing that the new Jewish immigrants from Europe did not go to college, so they're out of that game. He made Harvard a national university by getting students from every state. And not too many Jews in Montana. Every which way he could, he diminished the number of Jews from about 15 to 20% because they were admitted purely on merit by examination before his president, to down to about 3 or 4%. And that stays in through the Second World War. So we have a long history of discrimination. We have the longest history of discrimination because against women than any university, since we're the oldest. We didn't start admitting students to Harvard, women to Harvard College until the 1970s. But other forms of intrusion. This is Senator McCarthy in the 1950s and the anti-communist witch hunts of the 1950s, and among other people, he brings to bear into the Senate on a different committee. My teacher, I was Fairbank's last graduate student, John Fairbank, the kind of founder of modern Chinese studies in the United States, on the assumption, asking Fairbank, basically not saying it in so many words, accusing Fairbank of having lost China to the communists. Now, Fairbank was an incredibly influential professor, but even he could not lose all of China to the communists. But nevertheless, this was an effort to diminish debate and have a strong, you get a pro-Republic of China as opposed to People's Republic effort in Congress, and to look for communists everywhere. And this would continue through this period of time, through the whole 1950s. So we're in this moment right now of the last 2 or 3 years. We don't know how long it's going to last in terms of state intrusion to universities. This gentleman, this is a much later picture, is the great Berkeley sociologist Robert Bellah. And Bellah was a brilliant young sociologist who had been a member of the American Communist Party as an undergraduate in the 1940s. He is summoned to University Hall, where as dean I had my office, and where one of my predecessors, McGeorge Bundy, had his office. And this is McGeorge Bundy, dean of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, who summons this young man to his office and tells him he has to name the names of other Harvard students in the Communist Party. And he refuses, Bellah does. And he finishes his dissertation in a flash and goes to Canada, goes to McGill. He will later come back to Harvard very briefly on his way to a professorship at Berkeley, where he would become one of the great sociologists of the 20th century. And when I was dean of FAS, I got a letter from Bellah. Could he look at his archives? Could he look about his, what Bundy was doing to him, and what the Harvard Corporation, the 5 people plus the president who ran the university in those days, what were they doing? And I gave him permission, even though I actually didn't have the right to, look at all kinds of documents, the statute of limitations of which had not yet passed, gave him an archivist, and he wrote a terrific article in the New York Review of Books about Harvard and McCarthyism, and about how this university did not cover itself with glory during that period. And Mr. Bundy would later on not cover himself with glory as one of the chief architects of the American participation in the Vietnam War. But that's a later and different story. This is our faculty room. Some of you have been in it, in University Hall, one of the most beautiful buildings and one of the most beautiful rooms in all of higher education, usually incredibly quiet, with faculty meetings that are as boring as is possible to be, except when big things happen. Like in 1969, when students never see the room until they take it over. And here in 1969, in opposition to the Vietnam War in many other ways, students, leftists, mostly leftist students, come in, they physically evict another of my predecessors, Franklin Ford, Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, throwing him down a set of stairs. And he has a stroke and has to resign. And the university comes nearly apart by governance, and in some sense you could say authoritarianism from within and from below, because there was only one set of truths for many of these young people who fervently opposed the war, but many other things as well. And it was a time of near dissolution. Ford was the one who was injured. He'd be succeeded by the extraordinary economist John Dunlop, who is never known really in public, but really helps to hold the university together when it was a near thing in the years 1968, 69, 70, and 71. This is that same room, again now in color, which I presided over when I was dean, and it was in that same room where we had another eruption against what was believed to be, rightly or wrongly, authoritarianism from above. Basically, think of it as an impeachment of the president of the university, President Morris Summers, Mary Summers. And I had the unhappy job. Normally the president chairs the meetings of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, but because he was being attacked in a vote of no confidence and blah, 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 in a meeting that went on for 3 weeks, I had the unhappy job of chairing this meeting, which would in time lead to his resignation. And yet, if you've been following the news, Mr. Summers is not entirely out of the news, and I don't mean the most recent news. He, 2 years ago, after the Hamas attack on Israel and the small encampment that began, in our case very small, at Harvard, our then President Claudine Gay issues a letter signed by every dean condemning the attack, but also not condemning it as strongly as others would like. Summers, in an extraordinary breach of etiquette and governance, attacks her publicly. This leads to alumni attacks, which leads to congressional hearings, and finally to her dismissal by a very wavering Harvard corporation. A presidency that would last only 6 months, never with an opportunity to defend herself from these attacks. Our new president is doing better, but attacked in a different way today, as you know from the news, by President Trump and the American administration. And so we have this struggle. This is the Harvard Alumni Magazine. I'm chair of the board of the magazine, and one thing I'm proud of, it's the only alumni magazine I know of that is actually editorially independent. So what you see here is not what the president or provost necessarily want you to see. Although we certainly don't try to diminish the university in any way. And we're in a struggle, really now, against a would-be authoritarian regime, in my view. Not necessarily so yet, but the difference, if you look at the difference between Berlin in 1933 and Harvard in 2025, one of the big difference is we still have the rule of law. We still have courts. We still have expectations that this rule of law will be followed. And happily, Harvard and other universities, but Harvard has taken the lead in suing the Trump administration and has won every suit and is now getting federal funding back as a result of legal action. This thing is not over, but the American, the leading American universities do not need to follow the path of their German predecessors if this system too is to decline. We shall see. Of course, it's an ongoing story. But it's a story of a disaffection with higher education in the United States that goes back some ways. This is the great public university, UC Berkeley, a place that was home to the free speech movement. And you have to give Berkeley credit. You know, if there had been free speech on American campuses in the 1960s, you would not have had a free speech movement. But you did, and it made an enormous difference. This is the president of the University of California system that made the UC system the best public higher education system in the world. By a huge measure, made California what it is today in many, many ways. But he has a huge political argument, intrusive from on top, with the then governor in the 1970s, Ronald Reagan. On his way to Reagan bashing Berkeley as home to stateless radicals and blaming Clark Kerr here on the left of not being tough enough to crack down on them. And so he says to Kerr, well, he fires Kerr. And Kerr writes in his memoirs, "I went out of my office just as I went into it, fired with enthusiasm." Anyway, Berkeley used to be well off, and if you got a Nobel Prize, you would get a building. Later on, you would get a laboratory. Today, you get a parking space. The defunding of public higher education in the United States, really from the 1970s to the present, but particularly since the economic downturn of 2008, is a major, major crisis. Only 8 states are paying as much or more, or 7 states, as much or more as they are doing in real dollar terms for higher education today than they were in 2008. And yet, and part of it is the battle of politics. An alternative and happier story I'll go over very quickly is that of another case in this book, Duke University. This is James B. Duke, smoking one of the 25 cigars he smoked every day. A man who helped addict both America and China to nicotine, very successfully in both cases. And they built this beautiful campus in the 1930s, designed by an African-American architect from Philadelphia in this neo-Gothic style. And that architect never saw the campus because it was then too dangerous for a black man to go to rural North Carolina. And so he stayed home and only saw it in pictures and photographs. It's a place of aspiration. And I argue one of the leading newer universities in the United States, fastest rising. You can get a sense of aspiration when they built these stairs to its chapel. They built them like this so it wouldn't look as if centuries of scholars had tread over them, but they hadn't. It's just built like this, preternaturally worn, and so on. But a place that is also self-consciously one of the most international of American schools, and I was the chief advisor on their establishment of Kunshan Duke Kunshan University, a liberal arts college on an American model, residential in the city of Kunshan outside of Shanghai. Well, this brings us now finally to China. This is Peking University in its beautiful campus, originally Yenjing University, a Chinese-American university, American architecture as well. Peking University students have been causing problems for Chinese government since this moment in 1919, on May 4th. And they had an iconic chancellor that sets the bar so high of what higher education should be in China. German-educated philosopher, Tsai Ing-wen, educated at Leipzig, a huge admirer of Humboldt, believing in Lehrfreiheit, Lernfreiheit, and says that the Tsinghua University students should be given a 世界观的教育.
Peking University.
What did I say?
You say Tsinghua University.
Good. He would never forgive me. Peking University, Beida. So Peking University would have this. I'm so sorry. And he brings to the faculty Marxists, liberals, conservatives, all of whom can dispute one with another and have the students make up their own minds. There are other models in the 1930s. One of you mentioned, National Central University, Zhongyang Daxue. And this was set up by Chiang Kai-shek on the model of the University of Berlin, hence the good old Brandenburg Gate. It's now Dongnan Daxue, but it was then National Central University. And then, of course, there's Tsinghua University. Now I can talk about Tsinghua. Founded in 1911 with returned American Boxer indemnity money to send young Chinese to the United States. Founded at a time when the U.S. was giving all kinds of advice to China on all kinds of matters. The former Harvard President Eliot, whom we met just a few minutes ago, becomes an indirect advisor to Yuan Shikai. Yuan Shikai asks him to send him a constitutional advisor for the first constitutions of the Republic of China. And he sends this gentleman, Frank Goodenough. Goodenough is the guy on the left, by the way, in case you didn't know. And Goodenough helps to write 2 constitutions for the Republic of China. The first one makes Yuan Shikai president for life, and the second one would have made him emperor if he had not died first. I always say to my students, this is Harvard's contribution to Chinese democracy. Maybe one reason why we're not asked for advice these days. But back at Tsinghua, this is the great historian Zhang Tingfu, who was the teacher, again, of my teacher, John Fairbeck, who learned his Chinese history at Tsinghua University in the 1930s, here with his wife Wilma and their good friends Liang Sicheng and Lin Huiyin, and residing in a campus that looks like an American Midwestern campus because it is modeled on the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, particularly the Grand Auditorium. It also has, like Beida, an iconic chancellor, this gentleman, Mei Qi, who was chancellor through the 1930s, makes Tsinghua the greatest research university in China, and he is the moving force when the Japanese invade to build the Southwestern United University, Xinan Lianda, by bringing other Peking University and Nankai University to southwestern China. And throughout this period, defending academic freedom from the most repressive period of Kuomintang rule on the mainland. And this is the motto of Tsinghua University then, and it's still on the campus today. Something that dates back actually to the late 1920s, that there should be 独立之精神，自由之思想. There should be spirits independent and minds unfettered. That ends in 1950 with the communist takeover here of Yenjing University, here of East China Normal University, Furen University, a reform of higher education, and the first Communist Party cells at Tsinghua University in 1951. And Tsinghua is turned into a quite mediocre polytechnic, running by, according to Soviet plans, where many of their best departments in humanities and social sciences are sent to Peking University. And by the 1960s, Tsinghua University no longer looks like Urbana-Champaign, but it looks much more like Moscow State. But even this doesn't last. And this shows you what authoritarian moments can do to universities. Mao's Cultural Revolution physically destroys significant parts of the campus. Several thousand people are killed in pitched battles on the Tsinghua University campus. It eventually would reopen very partially in the 1970s. And eventually some people would graduate, like this gentleman, who somehow even then, in 1977, I believe it was, are still at the center of things. Worker, soldier, peasants are supposed to be the students. And even if you're not a worker, soldier, or peasant, it turns out you still can go, at least with certain connections. But Tsinghua University today, and this is me together with its former president, Chen Jining, now party secretary of Shanghai, just last summer. Tsinghua University today has recovered its near-death experience. It's still under a strong authoritarian government, without question, and navigating that, but at the same time excelling in every area where it is possible to excel. And so I worked with Chen Jining and the American businessman Steve Schwartzman to establish this Schwartzman College at Tsinghua University. And just think, and this shows you the trajectory of Chinese universities today. Tsinghua University, founded as a place to send young Chinese away, is now welcoming through Schwartzman the best and brightest of the world to come to Beijing. They are going to be, they are certain, we'll find out, the Rhodes Scholarship of the 21st century. Your BU students should not want a Rhodes Scholarship. And I recommend you don't write letters of recommendation for them. So apologies to the students here. Because who would want to go to a cold, foggy, rainy, self-isolating island off the coast of Europe when you can go to Beijing, be at the center of the world, and have beautiful blue sky days every day, other day? Who knows? That's the aspiration, and it's breathtaking. And this is, of course, a moment of extraordinary. Chinese universities date back to the late Qing, but now they are growing to be the largest and, without questioning, the most improved university system in the world, the fastest rising. This is just one of the 8 campuses of Zheda. This is the campus of Shihu Dashue, Westlake University, a private research university. This is Shanghai Tech, founded by the son of former President Jiang Mianheng, to be the Caltech of its day, but very strong also in the humanities. Extraordinary experimentation going on all over the country. And this is why international universities want to be part of this scene. So Johns Hopkins University, the first American research university. Also the first to get into China in 1984 with the establishment of this joint center. But they've been followed by others. Stanford has a Sihuyuan, a little campus on the campus of Peking University. China Europe Business School has a business school in Shanghai. University of Chicago, a center at Renmin University. NYU has a beautiful new campus in the southern part of Shanghai. They don't even call it the southern, they call it the South Bund. They were doing the Bund is miles and miles away. Anyway.
All is now connected into one.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you do have southbound.
It's marketing. Anyway, it's a beautiful, beautiful campus, an extraordinarily successful university. And then this is this Duke Kunshan University that I visited for the first time in many years last March for a conference. Now with a residential college of 2,000 students in a beautiful Jiangnan setting, and extraordinarily successful. And of course now naturally under attack by the House Committee on the Chinese Communist Party here in the United States. I'm afraid to say Harvard has never had a long-standing campus in China. We had a medical school there for a few years in Shanghai and gave up. I don't know why. But we do have a center in Shanghai, which I oversee. We don't have the whole building, but we do have a floor of it, a conference center and so on, all kinds of activities. We sent maybe 400 students to China last summer, not just here, but elsewhere across China. But we're probably better known for our automobile, or for our brand. This is the Hafo. So, unlike NYU Duke, we don't have a campus, but we have an SUV called the Harvard. It's a gas-guzzling SUV that has done very well in the Chinese market, but not so well recently as Chinese EVs have taken over. So it is now being exported in vast quantities to Russia. So the thought of all these Harvard cars going to Russia, it just makes me ill. But nevertheless. But look at the world and how it is changing. Top Chinese universities ranking worldwide according to one ranking, the QS University ranking Tsinghua, Beida, ahead of all but 2 of the so-called Ivy Leagues in this country. In Hong Kong University, also ranking remarkably well, University of Hong Kong, to their own enormous surprise, number 11 in the year, last year in the same QS ranking. Top 10 in Asia, Tsinghua University, Peking University, and so on. And if you look at the rise of Asian universities over time, just extraordinary change. And this is something that is not a passing thing. This is something that is real and is almost surely enduring. And if you look at Nature magazine, what universities publish the most in journals of Nature? Actually, Nature and Science magazine. I would say of universities, I'm proud to say that Harvard is number 1, and not on this list is MIT is number 10. But almost everybody in between is Chinese. And the leading one is the Chinese Academy of Sciences. And so you see this rapid rise for contribution to science journals by Chinese universities, overtaking the United States, which is declining in share. So What's the best university in the world in computer science? According to the US News and World Report, a ridiculous magazine that was founded, it was a news magazine going out of business, and so they found a new gig by coming up with college rankings. And they run that to profit. But anyway, usually they don't pay much attention to outside the US. But you want the best in computer science, you go to Tsinghua. You want the best in material science, you go to Tsinghua. You want the best in engineering, you go to Tsinghua. That tells you something, and I'm trying to look for Harvard down here. I can't quite find it in these things. So here you have to ask the question, as I bring this to a close, how can China not lead? I have no idea what Mr. Xi is shooting at here, but it's a nice picture which I like. How can China not lead the world of universities? Here we have the defunding of higher education in the United States. You have at least implicit restrictions on international talent coming to our shores. You have ideological campaigns against universities, the freezing of funding in the sciences, of all things. How can China not lead? Well, some of them come back to original Humboldtian values. First of all, this guy is still there in front of many universities. And if you ask the president of any university, why do you have a statue of Chairman Mao, a man who did more to destroy Chinese education than any other human being in the 20th century, they will tell you, well, sorry, we missed our chance to take it down in the 1980s. You notice that Peking University and Tsinghua University did take theirs down. But Jeddah doesn't have that courage today. And neither does Fudan and many others. That's one reason. Another is this. We talked about teaching about Marx in Berlin. Well, teaching about Marx in China, everyone has to study Marx. There's a Bishoke of studying Marxism. There are colleges of Marxism. But a bunch of Peking, Nanjing University, Renmin University students went and read not the Marxist textbooks, which have almost no Marx in them. They read the real Marx. And they went out to found labor unions in sweatshops in South China to help oppressed workers. And they were severely punished because this is not what Marxism is about in today's People's Republic. And 3 presidents or party secretaries were dismissed because they admired the ideals of these young students. And here are Peking University students protesting the arrest of their fellow students, and they too, a number of them, would be arrested. Or you would have here at Tsinghua during the zero COVID policy, protesting the obscene misuse of science during the last year of zero COVID in China, and protesting the only way they could, not by putting up signs with writing on it, but blank sheets of paper. And then blank sheets of paper became forbidden. I don't know how you do that. But
they were visited by police.
They would be visited afterwards. Or you have these 2 individuals, Guo Yuhua and Xu Jiangrun from Tsinghua University, both I believe in the law school. And Xu Jiangrun, when President Xi decided to ignore the precedent by staying on for a 3rd term, Xu wrote a scathing criticism of him, writing from Japan. And they've been put under great scrutiny and enormous political pressure. But here they are on the anniversary of Tsinghua's founding, going to present flowers to that monument for spirits independent and minds unfettered. But that they found that the monument is under renovation. So this doesn't speak well about the future if you can't trust your own students and your own faculty in trying to build a great country. This sense of extraordinary insecurity is far beyond what German universities had in the 19th century. And you see it, of course, in Hong Kong as well, where the national security law has changed many aspects of governance in Hong Kong universities. And several Chinese universities have decided to quit international rankings to pursue what they call a 中国特色的教育, education with Chinese characteristics. I have no idea what it means, except that all three of them were doing terribly in the international rankings. They're very fine institutions in many ways, but they're not strong in the sciences, which is what those rankings really count. So they're gaining political points here. But I will tell you this, Chinese universities measure themselves against the best in the world. And they are competitive with the best in the world. It's with the European and Americans that they want to be compared. That's the company that they grew up in. That's the company that they compete with. And that's the company that they expect to lead. This is an article I won't talk about right here. But one last thing. The values of the leaders of Chinese universities, and I know many of them personally, are very similar to the values of American university presidents. In 2013, the C9, the leading Chinese universities, got together with the leading American, British, and Australian research universities and came up with a statement of the characteristics of modern research universities. And they have these three basic points. First, academic freedom. Second, tolerance, a recognition of competing views. Third, institutional autonomy, the right to set your own priorities on academic grounds. All of this directly from Humboldt, but all of it strongly believed by these Chinese leaders. And they, today, like their American counterparts, can't always act on their beliefs. But this is, in my view, and knowing as so many of them as I do, what they believe. And once they are able to act on this, there is absolutely no stopping the rise of Chinese universities. Let me just end with some various photos here. Here's the Berlin, where it started, an ambulatory Berlin Gate, Nanjing University's new campus, commemorating National Central University, Tsinghua's Gate, the Souther Gate at Berkeley, and the Johnston Gate at Harvard, through which in 1936, at the 300th anniversary of Harvard, came this gentleman, Hu Shi, from Peking University, and he was given an honorary degree. And he donates, on behalf of Chinese alumni, this stele, which you can see outside of Widener Library, in his own calligraphy, in very beautiful 1 yen, without punctuation. We have a translation to it. But it says this: why are universities important? Why are they truly important for a country? And he wrote this: culture is the lifeblood of a nation. It's by virtue of its culture that a nation arises. But really it is due to learning, Schwer, or Humboldt would say Wissenschaft, that a culture flourishes. Intellectuals with deep knowledge and far-sighted vision understand that in establishing a solid foundation for their nation, the utmost priority must be given to the enhancement of learning. In some ways, he's echoing what Frederick William III said in 1810. I haven't heard it yet from our current president in this country in this regard. But he's also making the point of why universities are important, and I'll just close with this. Universities outlast governments. They outlast political regimes, and they outlast systems. Think of Tsinghua, founded in the last months of the Qing dynasty. It survives Yuan Shikai, the so-called warlord era. It thrives under the national government. It survives the Japanese invasion. It even survives Mao Zedong. And if you can survive Mao Zedong, you can survive anything. And it is back now, and it's one of the world's great universities. Harvard was founded before the United States, and in my view, it will be here after the United States, and by then maybe we'll be part of Canada. Thank you.
Okay, so that's a lot of insights and intellectual messages that I'm sure you guys, like me, have been soaking in and digesting. And I will make this very brief because I was supposed, I'm prepared to
Sure.
offer some comments.
Please.
No, I'm not going to do that anymore.
Criticism.
No. Yeah, this book, how many of you read the book?
There'll be a
So-
test next week.
So I read it because when it came out and I bought the hard copy. But reading it as just getting the insight is a very different experience than reading it and thinking of how I can have a conversation with Bill Kirby. And so in preparing for this conversation, I actually spent 3 weeks every night reading it more closely from back to back. So that's where I
You may have read it more closely than I did.
and I really enjoyed tremendously. But instead of offering my comments, I just feel like this conversation is for everybody. And I'm sure you guys, professors, policy makers, and guests or students, you guys can just jump in a conversation with Professor Kirby as effectively as I would be, because the university is just it's you. Okay? So I'm not going to give my comments, and I will just open the floor.
And you and I can talk later.
Yeah, we can talk more later, but I'll open the floor, and this is once in a lifetime opportunity for you to have a really intimate,
She doesn't think I'm
personal.
going to be around long.
But on the universities, so I think it will be very, very good opportunity to hear your thoughts. I'm sure Professor Kirby has heard so many praises because it's a really rich book and everything he says is just so great. But if you have experiences, thoughts, and your exposure and your ideas, that can enrich even the rich conversations on university, I think that will be very significant and valuable for us. So I'm opening the floor to you guys. We'll do Q&A. You can have comments. Keep it short. If questions, you can ask. People, don't disappoint me. I have high expectation of you. It's about you. It's about your learning, right? Please introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Sanjay Krishnan. I teach in the English department at Boston University. Thank you for this wonderful talk. I guess my question has to do with humanities. I mean, you speak about, in your quote, you refer to the enhancement of learning. And learning can mean different things. And I think you spoke of how, with Humboldt University, the humanities was supposed to take a much more central role. I'm curious if you think of the humanities as having as important a role in terms of conception of learning in Chinese universities, for instance, and if so, what form does it take? How does it differ from the ways in which you were trained as a historian?
Well, first of all, I would say the University of Berlin, the center of it was the philosophical faculty, but that actually included what we would call the humanities, the social sciences, and the natural sciences. It would just everything except professions. So it was not, and of course it was certainly the idea that people should be broadly educated and have a kind of a minimum level of education in virtually every dimension. That is the idea. But eventually in time to specialize, but not to specialize in German universities. Before that time, you go in and you're there to study law, or you're there to study theology, and so on. You still go in with one area or another, but it's a remarkably capacious idea. I think to put it into the present context, you have a serious, I would say, diminution of the strength of particularly of the humanities, not so much of the social sciences, but a bit of both, in both China and the United States, as we go into a more applied world and a more world in which it's, how many of my students across the river are computer science and applied math? How useful that computer science degree will be in an AI world, I have no idea. But it's and so our humanities enrollments are down to, or majors down to about 20%, where they used to be about 35%. Engineering growing very large, even though it turns out there's another engineering school in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I forget what it is. So it's and yet I've discovered that the best leaders, the best university presidents in this country or in China understand that an education without the humanities, without an appreciation for one's own cultural values and the values of others, is a comparatively barren one. After all, these universities in China lived through a period of cultural barrenness, known as the Maoist period, in which it was forbidden to think of your own culture in any positive ways, forbidden actually to talk positively about another history or another culture. Xi Jinping uses the phrase historical nihilism against people who criticize the history of the Chinese Communist Party, but in fact this was historical nihilism. So they know, and they have experienced, the older leaders of these institutions, they know what things are like in the absence of the humanities, because that was their youth. And so one of the first things that Tsinghua does, when it has its comparative autonomy restored in the 1980s, is to rebuild those departments that it had lost to Peking University. It's the first building of Tsinghua. It's called the Tsinghua Xuetang, Tsinghua Academy. At their 100th anniversary in 1911, they have a new Tsinghua Xuetang, a new Tsinghua Academy devoted entirely to the performing arts and to the liberal arts, but largely to the performing arts. And it's really trying to make a big statement. And I would say, I've discovered, now we shall see how long this lasts, but beginning around the year 2000 to 2020 at least, before COVID, every major university in Taiwan, in Hong Kong, and in mainland China was experimenting with new forms of general education. How do you make sure that you're just not educating a bunch of narrow engineers in the last best technology, because their first job is not going to be their last? How do you get them to be creative, independent problem solvers? How do you get them to think, not just to remember? And this, every Hong Kong university, for example, went from being a 3-year university to a 4-year university. And that 4th year was to be general education. And each one of the 8 public universities in Hong Kong has come up with a different model of this. But some of them really quite extraordinary. I was on the governing body of Hong Kong's universities, the UGC, as it was called, for a decade. So I watched this phenomenon happen really quick. And in China, everybody experiments with this. So Peking University has this Yuanpei program, named after Tsai Yuanpei, where among the things you could do is to study the classics, the Greek classics and the Chinese classics in the original languages. There's no American university that would give you that at an undergraduate level. I mean, they don't have too many people who can do that either, but it's still an extraordinary operation. And so they have these honors colleges that are deemed. Fudan University had a different approach. I don't know what it is now. Everybody will take general education courses. And sometimes you can make a mistake. We have reviews of general education all the time at Harvard as to what is it that students really have to know in order to be deemed even remotely educated in this day and age. So at Fudan, they had a slew of courses that were general education courses. Everyone had to take them. And the philosophy department got one course, huge lecture course. And it was about the critique of practical reason by Kant. If you want to turn everyone off to Western philosophy, that was their approach. And I think they've succeeded. They may have moderated that since then. But it's the ambition is there. Let's put it a different way. They believe our propaganda. In places like Boston University, to your undergraduates at Harvard, we say that we are educating you, not just training you, educating you to be citizens of the world, to know what you don't know, and to find out what you don't know, and to criticize what you inherit in order to become a thoughtful citizen, either of this country or whatever country you're from. And this is, all you have to do is look at the admissions brochures that we all send out. And the last thing I'll say about this, I remember when I was dean and we were redoing our general education program, a leader of a major Chinese university came to me and said, can we have Harvard's core curriculum? That was the previous general education. And I offered to sell it to him. We were getting rid of it. But when he heard we were getting rid of it, he didn't want it. He thought we knew what was better. I'm not sure our new one is any better, but it's different.
Yeah, but that exchange is very profound. I think that the government coercion usually do not get to weaken academic fellowship, the sense of community. It's really the kinds of market-driven mechanisms, professionalization, in particular now the AI age.
Right. No. I mean, and in fairness, the pressure on students is extraordinary. Worrying about jobs and futures, and the pressure. Even though you students in the audience may not know, the pressure on your parents is even greater. Anyone who knows higher education knows that the real market in higher education is not students. It's always parents.
Do we have people from this side? Okay, so we'll move along a little bit. Kathy, and then we'll move back to this.
Thank you for this talk. And I feel like there is an intrinsic contradiction in your proposition. That is, the universities in China is totally unfree because the government actually prescribe what policies, what funding they're going to be given, in what direction the science and technology is to develop. Very tightly controlled thought process, probably the most unfree period in China is the last few years because the government is so insecure. On the other hand, it seems as though they have, from your statistics or the statistics of the world ranking, they have reached an amazing achievement. And in your assessment, this is going to continue. Where do you get your confidence?
Well, I don't get my, otherwise I wouldn't have shown that picture of Xi Jinping shooting into nowhere. The point of that was to show that there are many fault lines in this system, and one of them has to do with precisely what you're saying. I would disagree, Kelly, that it's totally unfree. First of all, a lot of this funding, certain areas of funding are defined by the government, others by universities. It's very competitive to get that funding. Incumbents like Peking University and Tsinghua will get more of it than anybody else. Being in Beijing, you always get more. But still, there is a, not quite at the same level as in the electric vehicle market today, there is a ruthless competition for talent among Chinese universities. It used not to be possible. You couldn't move from one Chinese university to another without your own university's approval. That's gone. They're pilching people one from another, also from US, from elsewhere. And they do compete in grant proposals and so on to do really quite extraordinary things. And then in the classroom, some things are controlled very directly. It's gotten much worse under Xi Jinping than, you used to be able to teach a Marxism course, knowing that the students hated it, knowing that they hadn't read it, with a little bit of wit or something. And now because you're afraid of being informed upon, you teach it by the book, which makes it even more boring for the student. It makes them hate Marx. Poor Marx. But if you talk, when I've given lectures in China, I talk in small groups with students, you talk outside of these formal structures, and most Chinese classes are, your average student takes 7 or 8 classes a semester, and those classes tend to be 3 or 4 times larger than your average class here at Boston University. So they're not discussion classes. So it's not a matter of, it's in private conversations where there is a lot going on within the walls of universities. I'm very optimistic about what these people can do when they are given the chance to do it.
Yeah, very much agree. Virginia.
I wanted to ask about leadership, both leadership within universities, but also the leadership of the country. Xi Jinping and many others leaders are engineers, and they have great interest for science and technology as the golden standard to advance the nation. And then you have people in universities like Tsinghua, you said that are presidents and so on, who seem to also be interested in pushing for the humanities and so on. So how do you see this relationship between the engineers on the one hand and the university leadership? And then if you think of the United States, after all, President Trump did go to university, but he has been treating the University of Pennsylvania as badly as he could, and he and his people. And a lot of the people who are attacking Harvard
are Harvard graduates,
And then, what is the difference there in terms of this parallel between leadership of the country and leadership of the university?
Well, first of all, if you were to look at the percentage of Chinese leaders at any level that are engineers, it's actually diminishing. You actually see a few lawyers now, which is a dangerous thing. They're going to become like us, and then they'll be in real trouble. And Xi Jinping, not his fault. He got an engineering degree, but he was never able to really study engineering during the Cultural Revolution. So not his fault, but he never got a college education. Was denied it because of the politics of the time. And so you have a later generation, some who, an earlier generation studied in the Soviet Union, later in Europe and North America, that are part of this engineering ethos, which is of course there, but I would say so far, might change, but so far no member of the Standing Committee of the Politburo, even if they're an engineer, is there because they're a great engineer. That's not why they are there. They get there for quite different political reasons, and they rise through a system that is a very difficult one to rise into. The one person, if he were to rise to this, Mr. Chen Jining, who's Dr. Chen Jining, who's PhD from the University of London, who spent 10 years in the UK, atmospheric science, became Minister of the Environment after being president of Tsinghua, and cleans up the air in Beijing by moving a lot of stuff to Hubei, but still he cleans up the air in Beijing. Does a good job with that, and now, incredibly talented man, very articulate, witty man. I hope, for his sake, he doesn't rise too fast at the moment, because it's maybe not a good thing. But there is that level of talent that is both really solid in engineering and so on, but open to the ideas of the humanities and the social sciences. In helping to design this Schwarzman College, he came up with extraordinary ideas of how to make it more international, how to ensure that we had, some, more advanced levels of Chinese available there, trying to bring in faculty from different schools at Tsinghua, which only the president could do. So, I think the jury is still out. You have people, and think, of course, people want to be educated in the current vogues that are truly important for the advancement of science and technology. But they also want to be deemed to be educated people in their own culture and in global cultures. You can't do that simply by, applied math and engineering.
Well, we don't have much time, so I'll just take all the questions, and we have one grand response. So, identify yourself.
Sure. Hi, my name is Chin Yi-sung, anthropologist and lecturer at College of General Studies here at BU. I am curious, I'll try to be quick, but I'm curious about in the university, the bachelor distinction, the university spirit that you are kind of describing here. I'm wondering, what's the expectation about the application of knowledge within the university walls on the in the Chinese society? I'm wondering whether you can say something about that. And just very quickly, a second
What do you
point.
mean by the application of knowledge? I don't understand.
That how porous should the university wall be? Is it being encouraged that there are
Got it.
public
Got
intellectuals
it.
who are contributing to society?
Very good,
I guess
very
that's
good
all.
question at this moment, yeah.
Rashid?
Yeah, you talked about how a large part of the German-American story was attracting foreign talent and foreign scholars. Is China actively trying and succeeding in attracting foreign talent, or is that a goal that they have at all?
It is a goal that they have. You could go to Tsinghua.
Well,
Oh, sorry.
yeah.
Yep. Sorry.
Okay, Janelle, and then identify yourself, please.
I'm a faculty member here at Pardee and I'm an historian as well. And I had a question, I just wondered if you could say a little bit about some of the ideas that animated the establishment of the first universities in China in particular. And I'm thinking about this as an Ottomanist, because the first European-style universities established in Istanbul were about creating bureaucrats to actually service the state and to create expertise to service the state, and also to kind of put a buffer between Europe and the Ottomans to a degree. And so I'm just wondering if it's a similar story or different. Thank you.
Great.
Mark Storella, Professor of the Practice of Diplomacy here at Pardee. Took Soc Sci 11 about 100 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah, it changed my life. What's the greater danger for the United States in our universities? Is it from the left or is it from the right?
Good one.
Great.
The student,
I have a question
and
about.
then what's your name?
Oh, I'm Wen, and I'm studying sociology and comparative literature here. I have a question about, because you just mentioned that the universities in China, they are very competitive when it comes to the global rankings like QS
Yes.
or US rankings. But those rankings, they all have like a specific guideline or standard for like ranking universities. How do you think, it's not just for Chinese universities, how do you think universities in general can develop their own kind of standard for the development of university, and also like not to like compare in certain fields, tracks with other universities?
Excellent.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Jessica Gerber. I work in our BU's Office of Research, anthropologist by training. So I'm really interested in what you think this empire, this current empire of ideas that you have going around here, circulating among US, Germany, and China, how that's impacting nation university systems. Particularly, I studied Cambodia and their nation system, and the influences that these kinds of changing and shifting ideas of what the university is and how it functions impacts those kinds of systems as well.
Okay, thank you.
Last one.
Okay,
Hi, my name is
I won't
Jay.
be able to write down too
That's
many.
okay. Yeah.
Sorry about that. My name is Jahan Park. I'm an undergraduate student here studying business and computer science. And the question I'd love to ask is, just as the German system was an example for the rest of the world in education, do you think China could or is interested in playing a similar role for the developing world?
Great.
That's very good one. So, Phil.
All right. These are,
Very quick one.
these are very great questions. You know, actually, it's actually a real problem in Chinese universities. Not so much what they publish and such, but their walls are not porous on the question of this. You know, if you wanted to, presumably this talk today is open to anybody, right?
Yeah, yeah,
You know,
yes,
so-
yes, that's right, that's right.
And that's not true. And before COVID, most Chinese universities, you could walk onto their campuses. Since COVID, they're all locked down, and now only for political reasons, as far as I can tell.
Well,
Beidao was
Beidao, Tsinghua were always.
No, Tsinghua you could walk onto before COVID.
Oh, really? Okay.
Absolutely, no
Yeah.
problem.
Oh,
But-
Beidao was
but not-
always awful.
But not anymore.
Yeah.
And it's so bad it's even worse at Peking University. At Tsinghua, if you're a student and you want to get some jiaozi delivered, the jiaozi truck can still go to your dorm. At Tsinghua, they have to leave it outside the gate, so they go bad fast. So maybe that's, but the broader point is these are public universities to which the public is no longer invited. And some people say, oh, they don't want too many tourists. That's garbage. We have, you have tourists here, we have tourists across, they're no harm. And so it has to be political fear and political control. And it limits greatly, they don't have a strong culture of advertising their programs to a broader public anyway. But nevertheless, they've become too self-enclosed, and it really will limit their influence in a number of areas that are not publishing. Foreign scholars going to China, yes, and not in quite the same way yet, although this may change in certain disciplines, not the same way yet that you had going to German laboratories or Max Planck, what became Max Planck institutes and things of this sort. But as you have some of the, many of the leading scientists in certain areas of the world are now in China at Chinese universities, they will be getting students and postdocs from all over the world in laboratories in which the lingua franca will be English. And you can there are many degrees you could get that are purely English degrees at places like Tsinghua, not at most universities, but and that's mostly for people from so-called Belt and Road countries and things of this sort. But yes, that will happen. Whether it can happen on the same level, it would be pretty doubtful given the linguistic difficulties mastering Chinese as opposed to the not so easy language of English, but never mind that. First university in China was founded, it's actually Wuhan University, founded as the Self-Strengthening Institute. So the impetus is not yet really bureaucrats yet, although they become an alternative source of bureaucrats once the old exam system ends in 1905. So it became very important for that in the Republican period. But it's really to train people in Western science, technology, and social sciences and humanities so that China can be a fuller participant in the world and throw some of these foreigners out. Self-strengthening university. The greatest danger in the US, does it come from the left and the right? I think the danger has been in our history from both. At the moment, I would say it's greater from the right, but a very small proportion of the right that have a very kind of zealous, almost missionary attitude to bring people in without an orthodoxy, which is kind of tough to figure out. Leftism has had in other countries a serious orthodoxy, whether through a communist party or elsewhere, and that we have been spared. But it's a huge challenge, I find, in the classroom to ensure that different points of view get heard, left or right. And I was giving a talk at Berkeley a couple of years ago as this book was coming out, and I criticized China for an edict of 2013 of the 7 things that you could not talk about in universities, why no great university should have them. And a woman raises her hand saying, well, Professor Kirby, there are at least 7 things we can't talk about at Berkeley. She was not wrong. And so I always orchestrate in my class a debate in which somebody has to take some group of students, an incredibly unpopular view and a more standard view, so that, for example, if it's on a US-China issue, if the Chinese government's point of view gets heard as it would want it to be heard, so that we can see the world the way others see it, or the way a conservative actor would feel toward the American policy of opening toward China in the 1980s and 90s, critiques of that. But I think the danger is equal. Rankings rank only what can be ranked, right? And it's much easier to do it in publications. Most of them today, they're in English language science publications, and they don't rank, for example, great scholars of Italian literature who write in Italian, or of Chinese literature in Chinese. They don't do any of that. Above all, they aren't able to measure teaching, mentorship, inspiration, the kind of things that make classrooms extraordinary. And which is something I think the United States is still the best in the world at. And that's what we do. So I think they're highly skewed, and you have to remember, this is all that they are ranking. You know, Harvard is now ranked, you may know, number 7 in its own little league in football. I don't know what that means. But few of you know that Harvard has won 7 national championships in football. Who did the ranking? I don't know, but the last one was in 1920. I asked 2 things. On Cambodia, I'm not sure I can add much to it. But the point of using that phrase, empires of ideas, is that there has not been a leading power in the world over the last 4 centuries that has not also been a leader in culture and education. You can think of France in the 18th century. You can think of Germany and Britain in the 19th century. You can think of the and you can think of the Qing dynasty in the 18th and 19th century in East Asia. And you can think of the United States in the 20th century. Who are the people who are setting agendas of ideas and the places from whom others wish to learn? It's hard to get to that status, and it turns out to be easy to lose it if you're not careful. And does China have an export model for its universities? Not really. The Chinese model of universities, if you're looking at their governance model, they are themselves a recipient of a Soviet export model. There's nothing in Chinese history about having a party secretary. Nothing in the Hanlin Academy about having party secretaries. This is a Soviet model in China geared on steroids to Chinese characteristics, but with much more openness and much more creativity than the former Soviet Union ever had. But for it to work in the same way elsewhere, you would have to have a political system that's also emulative of China. And I don't know of anybody beside North Korea, which has its own system in its own way, that is in that game at the moment. So anyway, thank you all very much.